Hello. All right. I hope everybody's doing well. All right. I'm not going to wait long this time because of what we're doing here. Um, but I had to. We had to do this. This is a kind of a bittersweet one, just because of the nature of this live. Most of you know, or I'm sure all of you know, if you're on here, Ravi Zacharias, Christian apologist, passed away on Tuesday, and his impact. There's a few people. If you saw my live, I think was it last week, with this gentleman here, Destry and Charissa, about her father, who was Dr. Miles Monroe. The impact he had on my life as a mentor, a teacher. I can't really put into words. Outside of him, though, and a few others, but really, this gentleman, Ravi Zacharias, the impact he had on me, um, and so many others. I know I'm not the only one. It's hard to put into words in 30 minutes or however long we're on here. But I just want to set this up. I know everybody's got their Ravi stories and how they heard about him or met him or whatever the case is. I'll just tell mine real briefly. So I got into apologetics probably like 2008, I want to say. I was going through the back of my closet, actually up in 2006. And my mom always used to send me books. And this is when I was on the streets and doing my own thing. And I never read the books, of course, but when God kind of pulled me back, I wanted to be the good boy and be a good Christian son. And so I read one of these books, just the first book I saw. It happened to be The Case for Christ, and by Lee Strobel. And I read it. And I was like, I had never heard of apologetics. I wasn't looking for apologetics. I wasn't even looking for evidence. I was good, but I have a very logical mind, just the way I think. And so it just appealed to how I'm made up. And so then I started kind of being self-taught, teaching myself, reading who I could find. And then I stumbled across, or somebody brought up Ravi Zacharias to me. I was like, I don't know who that is. And from the first time that I listened, I believe it was on a podcast, I was like, I've never heard someone break this down this way. And from that point, I just kept listening and listening, to the point, a few years ago, actually a couple months after losing my job, I got accepted to this week-long emerging apologist program at Ravi Zacharias Institute. And I had the opportunity to go there and train with Vince Vitale and Joe Vitale and Michelle Tepper, Sean Hart, and so many others, and meet them. And it had already just deepened my hunger and thirst for apologetics. Prior to that, I had trained mostly at Cross Examine Instructors Academy for, I think, about 3 years before that, with Frank Turek and Jim Warner Wallace, Sean McDowell, Greg Kokel, Bobby Conway, all those guys. And so the opportunity to go to RZIM and train, it was like like the mothership calling you home. It was just an opportunity that I couldn't pass up. And being there with them, I could see Ravi's heart very clearly in each and every one of them, and how they, and not just in how they answer, but in or not just in the answers they provide, but in how they provide those answers. So then they invited me to serve with them at the University of Florida on a university missions trip. And what they do is, for a week, they go to these different college campuses. And I think it's so awesome that they do it for a week. It's not just in and out, because you can build very short, brief, at least, relationships with some students. And I had the opportunity to talk with students on the campus for a week long. I had this one conversation with one kid every day, same spot, same time of day. And we'd have some deep conversations regarding scientific evidence and morality and different things. I had one conversation with a kid after a talk by my friend Brandon Cleaver. I talked with him for about 2 hours. Then this kid came back to our evening talk. After that talk, I talked with him another 3 hours. So just by myself, that's 5 hours plus the 2 hours of talks. And he still wasn't convinced. So I sent him home. I was like, look, I don't think I haven't proven the case, but that's okay. And there's more to that story. And actually, a year later, I kept in contact with him throughout the year. And he actually did make a decision to follow Christ. He texted me a year later and told me he's on the team. So that has a happy ending. But what I've learned and what I try to learn, what I try to model as an apologist is just the way, not so much the answers, but those are important too, but the way in which Ravi Zacharias was able to communicate those answers and the heart with which he did it, and to even be able to express truth to very antagonistic people in very antagonistic environments. A couple years ago, I was in Atlanta. Him and some of the team were speaking at Passion City Global Church, Louis Giglio's church. And I met Ravi and talked with him briefly. And that was a surreal moment. I don't really, like I say, get starstruck or anything like that, but it was more of a respect thing. And he was so gracious to talk with me and kind of answer some of my questions briefly. And the interesting thing was that was on the weekend of my mom's birthday. My mom passed away later that year. But before she passed away, whenever she was with me, she had an eye issue that left her almost blind for the last few years of her life. And when she was with me, she would always say, "Put Ravi on." So I have these episodes loaded up on the TV, or if we're driving in the car, I put on a podcast. But she loved to listen to him. She couldn't see, obviously, but she could hear well. And there's only a couple people that I remember that she really wanted to listen to all the time. When I am driving, almost always I have either a YouTube video or some kind of podcast of Ravi Just Thinking playing in the car. And so that's just a brief level of the impact that it's had on me. We'll get into some more of it, but I wanted to share this in honor and tribute to him. So I'm going to turn it over to Destry and just let him share some thoughts, and we'll get into some of the things that Ravi taught me and taught us.
Actually, I have a very similar story. I don't know, as you said, I'm like, man, have I been following the Alex's footsteps? Because it was essentially the same thing, right? Had gone to CIA and had great teaching, and if I'm not mistaken, you probably introduced me to Ravi, right? And so so I started off by just catching them on YouTube, which is great, in this digital age now that teachers are able to teach beyond the grave, so to speak, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I started listening to podcasts and watching YouTube videos, and I actually ended up sending a young lady who was leaving high school, going into college. I took her down to the RZIM headquarters because they have a course for either college freshmen or high school seniors to equip them so that they are prepared when they get to these secular universities. And she was so blown away by attending the program. Fast forward, and I remember the time we went to Passion City Church, and actually, as I thought about it today, I think that's how that is how you gauge the hunger of somebody. Like, we literally flew into Atlanta just to go there, and then turned around and came right back, right? But so that also goes to show the kind of pull that he has, or that he had, right? That, you know, that you're willing to invest your time and your money to just sit under that teaching. And I think, in fact, last year, I had the opportunity to go to the RZIM's Emerging Apologist program, and just the program that they have set up. And here's what I like about this. And you mentioned earlier, Dr. Miles Monroe, because he would do something very similar in his kingdom training seminars. And what I saw, the parallel between those two teachers, mentors, is that they're already setting up the concept of legacy, right? Having things live beyond them, where it wasn't, you know, some places you can go to conferences and the object of the conference is to teach you information. Their conferences are different. They're not conference, but their training is different. Their training is designed to teach you to teach this, because I guess, you know, you understand that they can't be in every place at every time. But if I can make 15,000 more little me's, then I can actually be in every place at every time. So yeah, it was an honor to be able to sit there, get the teachings, listen to them personally. It was amazing.
Yeah. Amen. So, you know, I was thinking about this today, and I guess everybody now, you know, is posting and rewatching clips, and you know, hearing them live. It was a treat, and just to see fielding questions live, and especially me as an apologist, you know, the talk is kind of easy to prepare. I can study, I can put the talk together, but the Q&A, you don't know what questions you're going to get. And now that particular day was in a church setting, so the questions weren't necessarily antagonistic, except for like my atheist friend might say this, but it wasn't an actual atheist coming to the mic in that environment. But we've all seen those clips, and we've seen how he handled those situations. But I say the talk is the easy part, except that when I watch him, I'm like, hey, I gotta, I gotta step it up. You know, like I wish I could just have his memory. If there's just one thing, I just want his memory.
Bruh.
Like he would be teaching, and you can see, like he'll step away from the lectern or whatever is there and almost close his eyes as though he's reading it across the back of his eyelids, quoting entire stanzas of poetry, quoting entire verses out of a song, a rock and roll song, quoting long quotations from other people, whether they be Christian or atheist or whoever, telling you the exact date of such and such an event, or, you know, not even a necessarily Christian related event, just this happened and this is where I was when this happened. Just, it blew my mind. It blows my mind, just to be able to recall those things. But they were always not to show off his memory. They were specific and pertinent to the situation at hand. Even when he's answering a question, that he can draw back to something, so it doesn't just become an intellectual response, but it speaks to the existential part of the question as well. So yeah, I just want that man's memory. I don't know if I'll ever get it, but let me jump into a few things. So he helped me, Ravi Zacharias helped me and so many others clarify not just the answers to questions that need to be asked, but what are the questions? So not just giving the answers, but what are the questions that need to be asked? And one of the things for me, and I've been saying this a lot, is that my issue with atheism, and that's predominantly what I deal with, that's predominantly what he dealt with, is not only that it doesn't seem to have the best or most complete answers to the questions, but it can't justify asking the questions. And I think that's something that in our conversations with other people, we need to be aware of, because, like, for example, we'll talk about morality in a second, but the 4 questions that Ravi always brought us back to pertain to origin, meaning, morality, and destiny. So origin, where did I come from? Meaning, why am I here? Morality, how should I live? And destiny, where am I going? Those 4 questions are 4 questions that every person needs to be able to answer. I don't care what worldview you come from, atheism, Islam, Hebrew Israelite, Mormon, whatever you need to be able to answer those questions within the context of your particular worldview, and do so with correspondence and coherence. They have to correspond to reality, and they have to form a coherent worldview. So if you have 3 out of 4, it doesn't work. And so these are some of the things that we need to be able to bring to people when we're having conversations, and doing it with love and with respect is something that Ravi did best. I want to read this quote by C.S. Lewis, because when we're talking about specifically with the why am I here or how should I live question, morality is the issue of the day. What is the moral standard? Is there a moral standard? And where do I get that from? C.S. Lewis stated, "My argument against God was that the universe seems so cruel and unjust." He's a former atheist. "How had I got this idea of just and unjust? A man does not call a line crooked unless he has some idea of a straight line. What was I comparing this universe with when I called it unjust?" He said, "If the whole show was bad and senseless from A to Z, so to speak, why did I, who was supposed to be a part of the show, find myself in such violent reaction against it? Of course, I could have given up on my idea of justice by saying it was nothing but a private idea of my own. But if I did that, then my argument against God collapsed too. For the argument depended on saying the world was really unjust, not simply that it did not happen to please my fancies. So thus, in the very act of trying to prove that God did not exist, in other words, that the whole of reality is senseless, I found I was forced to assume that one part of reality, namely my idea of justice, was full of sense. So if the whole universe has no meaning, we should never have found out that it had no meaning. Just as if there were no light in the universe and therefore no creatures with eyes, we should never have known that it was dark. Dark would be a word without meaning." In that way, when Ravi talks about morality, he would bring it back to this. If you're going to say that evil exists, you're assuming that good exists. But that means you need a moral law on the basis of which to differentiate between good and evil. But once you have a moral law, you have to assume a moral lawgiver. And he would always say that that's who you're trying to disprove and not prove. So if we remove the moral lawgiver and then we remove the moral law, that means there is no such thing as good. And that also means there's no such thing as evil. It's just opinion. So the whole question collapses. And I watched him do this time and time again, to the point now that, I'm doing it. What did you think? I don't know, the first time you heard that, or how you explain that to other people when they're asking certain questions that they don't really have the right to ask based on their worldview.
Actually, the very first time, I heard it, it was like, the old, oh, I could have had a V8. Like the way he explained it just made it sound so simple, right? Because the idea is evil does not exist in and of itself, right? Evil is the depravity of something. It's like the only reason your tooth is decaying is because you have a tooth. But to complain about the tooth decay without the tooth means nothing. The only reason that you can say that the tree is rotting is because there's a tree. So even when he began to explain the entire concept of the moral law, is that you're calling something unjust, to go back to C.S. Lewis, right? Or you're calling something evil because you have a standard of what just is, because you have a standard of what good is. But if there is no God, then the standard falls apart. And if the standard falls apart, then how are you even justified to ask the question?
Yep. And that's what it all comes. I lost your voice.
1 2 1 2.
All right.
Okay.
So yeah, it does, and it all comes back to that foundation, because if you don't have the foundation from which to ask the question, then your question becomes invalid. Now, and you could still be right about the conclusion, but you don't get to philosophically jump to that conclusion. That's a philosophical error. So those things that he lovingly pointed out to so many, the question kind of evaporates. And I think as apologists, us being able to do that, to communicate that truth in love, would go a long way. There's a lot of vitriol, or at least there can be in the apologetics world. And, we want to be able to communicate in a way that people are actually hearing us. Ravi used to say, there's no point giving somebody a rose to smell if you've already cut off their nose. Right? You could be right and be wrong at the same time, because you made the truthful point, but they're not listening no more. So then what happens? We don't want to win the battle. We want to win the soul. And like I said, no one to me has done a better job of modeling that.
And I think it always puts me in mind of a quote that I heard. It says, because we call him an apologist, which he was, but he was an evangelist. That's what he did, right? And the idea is that you can't evangelize and antagonize at the same time. And he was able to, he had this uncanny ability to go into not just hostile environments where the people are like hostile countries, right? And able to talk to the humanity of the person, right? The human being, right? The essence of it. And because he would give stories about, talking to members of Hezbollah and talking to, terrorist leaders, but he reduced them to a human being. And some people just have that uncanny ability to connect with people. He had that thing.
Yeah. Amen to that. I want to jump there. I had a couple of other points I wanted to bring up in his honor. But let's stay with that, because he always focused on the fact that he said behind every question is a questioner. And this has helped me at least to soften my approach when responding to atheists or to anybody, especially face to face. And I've had a lot of conversations with Hindus, Buddhists, Muslims, atheists, Jehovah's Witnesses, whoever. Gone to lunch with them, sat down to eat with them, like that has never been, or it hasn't, since I've understood this, it hasn't been an issue. And I think that is something that we as apologists can all take, that relational aspect is really what opens the door for the evangelistic conversation. Because when you don't antagonize their worldview and understand that we all had some faulty thoughts of some version before we had a true thought, then we can better understand that this is still a human being in the Imago Dei. This is still somebody that is redeemable, not by us, but by him. And for that reason, we're simply the middle person that God has graciously allowed us to be his mouthpiece for to this person. And so that humility that I saw modeled, that we all saw modeled, is something that I want to learn to model better. Anything on that?
Because I think the interesting thing is, and even aside from him, so I think about all of the instructors at RZIM, right? All the speakers at RZIM, all the instructors at EAP. They all have that there's this softness about them, so to speak, right? Where they disarm you. And I think that particular thing is necessary when you're trying to, maybe I don't want to use this word, but when you're trying to win someone over, right? Because in that same vein, because you cannot win those that you offend, right? And we all can be right, but wrong at the top of our voice. And so he just had that uncanny ability, man, just to win people. Yeah. But I believe that's because he really understood at the very core that we're all made in the image of God, and he was able to get to the heart of people's matters.
Yeah. And anybody in the chat, feel free to put any comments you want about Ravi's impact on you, or any questions about, not that I can answer everything, but any questions either apologetic related or about something you heard him say, or anything that you want us to talk about. I want to go here that, one of those 4 questions was, why am I here? And that, pertaining to the meaning of life. And most of my ministry prior to knowing apologetics, and really augmented by that, is in reference to purpose. And this comes back to Dr. Monroe. So But what apologetics did, especially the way I understand it now and the way that he has helped me, that Ravi has helped me to understand it, is purpose can only exist if ultimate meaning exists. And ultimate meaning can only exist if God actually exists. And apologetics helps me prove the case that God does actually exist. So for me, apologetics is a means to an end. And kind of like you said, he was an evangelist. This was a means to an end. For me, I'm trying to prove the case for God, to get you to see meaning, to get you to walk in your purpose. So those are the steps, and then to get you to lead. And that's a whole nother thing. But I think the foundation has to come back to, when we talk about the Imago Dei, this is another unsupportable claim by non-theists, that we all have inherent value. It's a true statement, but not if naturalism is true. So the way I try to explain this to people is, if there is no value, there is no meaning. If there's no meaning, there's no hope. And we don't have to go to the last part right now. If I have some shoes, or I want to buy some shoes, and they cost $100, I can say, okay, these some nice Kobe's, I'm cool, $100. If they tell me it's 1,000, I'm like, nah, it's not worth that much. Because the value of something can only be determined by one of two people, either the creator of a product or the purchaser of a product. Only in the Christian worldview are they the same person. We've been redeemed, we've been bought back by who? By our creator. So that also means that only in a Christian framework can we even really begin to talk about, from an objective point of view, inherent human value. And it's only at that point can life have meaning. I was watching a clip with Ravi earlier this week, and someone came in the Q&A. He was talking about, someone came in the Q&A and asked this question, that she said, how do I make the jump? I hear what you're teaching. I don't know how to make the leap to the understanding the supernatural part. Because I've been an atheist my whole life, but I feel like I have no meaning. And so at least she, and a lot of others, actually prominent ones, are honest in that sense. They acknowledge, yeah, there really is no meaning to life. We're just here. It's a rosy picture they paint. But understanding how to objectively and intellectually support meaning and get to purpose, that helped me and helps me tremendously in trying to communicate that to people. Because now it's not just this buzzword, like it's become, purpose, purpose, purpose. It's something that's objectively a fact about God. And Ravi wrote a book that I have somewhere called The Grand Weaver. And he kind of outlines how God is tying all the strings together, and the strings that we can't see, connecting all the dots. And that is where your purpose will be discovered. Do you have anything you wanted to add on the why am I here, and meaning and all that?
Yeah. Well, actually, I think you kind of covered it all. But the whole idea of purpose, again, means the original intent, right? The why is, what is the original purpose behind the thing? And so I guess we're just going to keep bouncing back and forth between Dr. Monroe and
Ravi.
Ravi. I don't, sometimes I want to call him professor. I don't know. But understanding the why is the reasoning behind the maker, the creator, the reason behind the pen or the candle or the light. Right? And so Dr. Monroe would always say, whenever purpose is not known, abuse is inevitable, right? Meaning, if you don't know the reason something exists, you will abuse that thing, intentionally or unintentionally, right?
Right.
So I think one of the great things that Ravi was able to do is say, hey, you do have inherent value, right? Based on the creator. And to your point earlier, that in an atheistic worldview, you like, how do you ascribe value when you're, according to you, your ancestors were pond scum? What do you get value from that?
Yeah.
When you're, when you were just in a they say a lightning bolt struck a puddle of mud, and here you are, like, where do you have, but in the Judeo-Christian worldview, and it's only in that worldview because it's only in that worldview that your connection with the creator is personal.
Mm.
Every other worldview is just, it's not very personal, right? But in that worldview, it says you're made in his image and in his likeness. And it talks about the foundation or the formation of the earth, right? The account of Genesis. And if we say that the universe and the account of Genesis, if that is true, and then God created all of this on purpose, that means there also must be a purpose or an intent for everything inside of that universe. That includes you and I.
Excellent. And that's what it boils down to. You got to have a source. You got to have a root that you're tracing everything back to. Otherwise, it's just floating in midair. As he used to joke with people, feet firmly planted in midair, right? And that's where a lot of worldviews leave you, because if you don't have a source to come back to or to sustain what you're saying, even if you're right, you're wrong. So he would also often reference this conversation in John chapter 18 that Jesus had with Pilate. And Pilate says, "What is truth?" Before that, Jesus says, "For this cause I was born, and for this cause I have come into the world, that I should bear witness to the truth. And everyone who is of the truth hears my voice." And then Pilate almost flippantly says, "What is truth?" And then he leaves the room. And Ravi would highlight the fact that this is ironic, because he asked that question to the one person on the planet that could actually answer. Jesus didn't know the truth. Jesus was the truth, is the truth rather. So, if there's one person you should at least pause and say, well, let me see what he has to say, it should have been him. But Pilate walked out the room. And I think there's a lot of revelation in that for today, that do people really want truth, or do they just want to continue to believe what they already believe? I was writing something a while ago and made a comment, or no, I was on a radio interview last year, and I said, I think most people do want truth. And the interviewer was actually saying, I don't know if they actually do. And I was like, yeah, you're probably right. Because, and I say it both ways. I think people think they do want truth. I don't think anybody's walking around like, man, I hope I get lied to today. I think people do think they want truth, but I think they get uncomfortable when the truth challenges what they think to be true, if that makes sense. Especially when they've been believing it their whole lives. So, this idea of truth. I remember when you and I were in Burundi in Africa a few years ago, and I was preaching on that Sunday, and my sermon was partially about truth. And I turned to the translator and I said, what is 1 + 1 in your country? He said 2. I was like, wow. I was like, you know what? Back in Chicago, it's also 2. Because truth is truth. Objective truth has no boundaries. It is true whether you believe it or not. And I think with Ravi, he was able to communicate the truth in such a way that even people who had their own version of truth or believed a different thing to be true, they had to at least pause and be like, man, he makes a really good case. I don't really think I can argue with that. I just don't want it to be true, but I don't really know how to prove him wrong.
Yeah, it's funny because when you were saying people want truth, and I was thinking, I'm not even sure that's the case. Because maybe I don't want to say most people, because I don't have any scientific data to back that up, but there are quite a number of people who don't believe such a thing as truth even exists, right? And so they say, you have your truth and I have my truth, and everybody's truth is different there, and there are 3 sides to every story. No, it's just really only one would actually happen. We might have different perspectives, different takes on it, but there's only one truth. The problem is truth comes at a cost. And I don't think many people want to pay the cost for that truth, because it may mean abandoning everything that you know.
Yeah.
It may mean abandoning everything that you believed up into that point. And it's a very hard sell for me to now say everything that I've thought for the last 30, 40, or 50 years of my life is a lie. That's a hard sell. So oftentimes people will say, you know what, I'm going to stick with the lie because I'm more comfortable in the lie, is what I know.
Yeah.
And so the idea, the truth, and he would always make the reference that, Winston Churchill would make when he said that, the truth was so valuable that it is oftentimes protected by a bodyguard of lies.
Yeah.
The truth is a valuable thing and it's costly.
Mm.
Oftentimes, I'm not sure we want to accept the cost of that truth.
Yeah.
Because now we have to be accountable to something else we might not want.
Yeah. I was interviewing Abdu Murray, who North American director for RZIM a week or two ago. And I remember, I don't think he said it in the interview, but he said before that the answers are not hard to find. The answers are hard to accept. When I teach on evidence for the Bible being valid, one thing I say is that once you look at all the evidence, if you look at it open-mindedly, like the amount of evidence is kind of embarrassingly a lot. Like there's a lot of evidence to support the fact that the biblical documents are accurate, valid, true, verifiable, all that. So the question is not, can I trust the book? It's, am I willing to submit to what it says? And that's where, to your point, we get some tension. They're like, yeah, the documents seem to hold up, but I'm not sure I'm willing to go. So it's actually, to this point, Ravi inspired me to start my conference. It's called the Proof for the Truth Conference, because I believe truth should be the foundation of everybody's life. And so we're going on year 3 now. But his allegiance to, his explanation of, and his commitment to explaining truth, that truth does exist, who is the truth, what is the truth, kind of led me to this, even though I wasn't trying to start a conference. But the Proof for the Truth now is an organization, and it's a lot of tribute to Ravi, because a lot of why I feel led to do that, especially since I target youth and young adults mostly, is because of him and his focus on that generation, both in the teaching and answering their questions. So yeah, it's a bittersweet moment. Before I wrap up, I know Ravi is where he longed to be, and that we can rejoice. I pray blessings over Margie, his wife, and his kids, and over the whole RZIM team. As you mentioned earlier, Destry, the legacy is strong. That is secure. I remember I think it was last year, and I think I was saying, hey, did you see this? And he turned over the CEO and the presidency to his daughter and to Michael Ramsden. And I was like, that's awesome to see it done intentionally, where I'm saying, while I'm still alive, I'm handing the baton. And no one, including him, knew the time he had left, but it just shows how in line and in tune he was with the Holy Spirit.
Yeah, it's and I think that's, for me, it was difficult because it was almost because he was winding down, and he had just handed over the day-to-day operations or the running of RZIM, and it looked like he said, hey, I'm going to settle down and give to Margie all that I've been unable to give her, because she's given up so much to support me in this ministry. And so I felt a great deal of sorrow for her. And the interesting thing is, and oftentimes as it happens, something very simple. He'd had these back issues forever, and he's going to go in and do something else with his back, and here they find this other thing, which turned out to be cancerous. But the thing is, as we talk about as the scripture talks about in that First Thessalonians, that he said, don't be uninformed about those who sleep in death. So so that you do not grieve like the rest of mankind with no hope. And we believe in Jesus Christ, so there's a hope.
Mm.
And I think that is the crux of the message that he preached, hope. Listen, and even if we go back, being apologists in that, First Peter, it all boils down to hope. As a Christian, we don't have a better philosophy than anyone else. We don't have a better theology than anyone else. What we have is the hope in the life, death, burial, resurrection, and coming again of Jesus Christ.
Amen.
And that's what he taught. That's what he preached. And so I know that he is in the place that clearly he's supposed to be. He's been called back home. So we grieve the personal loss because he is not here. But because of RZIM, because of his YouTube videos, because of the podcast, there will be generations to come, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 years from now, who will know about him and the legacy that he left. And so I'm always reminded that a quote that I heard Dr. Monroe says, live in such a way that you don't need a tombstone.
Mm.
He's lived his life in such a way that he does not need a tombstone for someone to go to the cemetery to remember, oh, that's who that guy was.
Mm. Amen. So on that, didn't want to be long with y'all tonight, and thank you for jumping on. I just wanted to do what I can to just kind of share my thoughts and memories with him and what he's taught and what he continues to teach, even while he's physically not here anymore. I pray that this bless you in some way. And, like I said, we're going to continue to make sure his legacy lives on and his teaching, his methodology, and all those things live on so that we can all be better apologists, better evangelists in honor of Ravi Zacharias. So God bless y'all. Have a good night.
All right. Love you, bro.
Love you too.